We know that Americans work harder and longer than ever before and have less and less to show for it. Hard work doesn't pay off the way it used to. Workers in Ohio have known that for a long time, that their paychecks don't stretch far enough. And this month, the state's second largest newspaper, the Columbus Dispatch, reported on just how bad things are for far too many Ohioans. The Dispatch reported on a new study by the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio that found, get this, that 2 out of the 10 most common jobs in Ohio, 2 out of the 10 most common jobs in Ohio, only 2 out of 10 pay enough to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Think about the number of people in fast food restaurants. Think of the number of people cleaning hotel rooms. Think of the number of people that are orderlies in big hospitals. Think of the number of people that do clerical work and are bank tellers and that simply don't make enough to live any kind of a lifestyle which they, when they were kids, expected to live. Look at it this way. The average renter in Ohio earns just over $13 an hour. The average renter in Ohio earns just $13 an hour, $2 less than the $15.25 an hour they need to rent a basic 2-bedroom. Now that's statewide, but in Columbus, the city's largest city, it's worse. You need to earn $17.50 per hour to rent a basic 2-bedroom apartment. Policy Matters Ohio has done great work shining a light on working Ohioans. Their report this spring found that last year, 6 of the 10 most common jobs in our state paid so little that workers would need food stamps to feed a family of 3. 6 out of the 10 most common jobs in Ohio paid so little that workers would need food stamps if there were 3 in the household. Think what this means. These are Ohioans doing everything that we've asked for. They hold down a job, they get up every day, they go to work, they're serving their community, they're holding up their end of the bargain we're supposed to have in this country, but the corporations they work for don't pay them what they're worth. It's not just the workers in these jobs who get hurt by this, it's obviously their families, and it's interesting, it's taxpayers. Here's why. When corporations refuse to pay workers a living wage, when they refuse them the opportunity to save for retirement, when they refuse to provide decent health care, they create a drag on the economy. You know why? Because taxpayers pick it up. Someone has to pick up the tab when corporations pay $9 and $10 and $11. Again, I was at my high school reunion a couple years ago. I sat across the table at dinner, my wife and I did, with a woman who has worked for a bank, a very well-known, huge national bank, and she had worked there for 30 years as a teller. She was making $30,000 a year after 30 years working as a teller. So what happens with people like her? The taxpayers end up helping to finance their generally barely adequate standard of living. No one, and I'll get to that in a second, no one working 40 hours should be forced onto food stamps or housing vouchers or Medicaid or other government aid just to stay afloat. American citizens, American taxpayers shouldn't be forced to subsidize wages for mega corporations. But that's what's happening in Ohio, and it's happening in Wisconsin, it's happening around the world, so around this country. So if someone's making $10 an hour, they're probably getting their insurance from Medicaid, paid for by taxpayers. They're probably getting the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a refundable tax credit provided by taxpayers. They're probably getting food stamps provided by taxpayers, the SNAP benefit. They're probably getting housing vouchers. So what this means is because a company only pays $10 an hour, taxpayers have to provide the rest. So taxpayers are fundamentally subsidizing these huge, think of these huge retail operations in this country. Think of these huge fast food restaurants. Think of the executives for those corporations who are making $2 million, $5 million, $10 million a year. They're not paying their line workers anything close to their economic value. And you know what happens then? It means taxpayers subsidize these huge companies with their exorbitant executive salaries. The Dispatch this month talked with a home health aide who lives on the east side of Columbus. Her name is Karen Taylor. Karen works hard. Ms. Taylor works hard supporting her daughter and grandchildren. She only makes $11 an hour, well below the $17 I mentioned that you need in Columbus to afford a family apartment. She relies on federally subsidized housing. She told Dispatch, I know how to budget. I can stretch $20 really far, but wages, that's my problem. She works hard, she does her part, she needs help to make ends meet because companies refuse to pay workers like her a living wage. Doesn't have to be that way. Last year, Mr. President, and as some in this body remember, I introduced a bill called the Corporate Freeloader Act. Works this way. If you're a huge corporation, I'm not talking about a mom and pop restaurant. I'm not talking about a lawn care service with 10 employees or self-employed or 30 employees or even 100 employees. I'm talking about large corporations. If you're a large corporation and you choose to pay your workers so little that they are disproportionately forced onto government assistance, again, food stamps, Medicaid, earned income tax credit, subsidized housing. You pay your employees so little that they're eligible for all those programs, you need to reimburse American taxpayers. You're a huge corporation. Your executive vice presidents make $1 million. The senior executive vice president makes $5 million. The CFO makes $7 million. The CEO makes $10 million. But you're paying your workers $10, $11, $12 an hour. They go to this government assistance. You know what? If we passed a tax bill, not the one that was negotiated down in the majority leader's office, where all the special interest lobbyists scurried in and out when you turn the lights on. If we had passed, instead of that tax bill that gave all kinds of tax benefits to the rich, if we had passed a tax bill with my Patriot Corporation Act, I'll talk about that in a moment, and with the corporate freeloader fee, we would have seen a very different tax bill, and we would have seen a tax bill that would have said to these companies, pay your workers a little better and you'll get a little better tax break. So, if you're a huge corporation, you pay your workers so little, they're forced into government assistance, you reimburse American taxpayers. That's the corporate freeloader fee. On the other hand, if you're a company like a whole lot of companies in my state are, if you pay good wages, if you pay $15 an hour or more, offer good benefits, if you keep jobs in this country, production in this country, you don't offshore your production to Mexico or China, then you get a tax cut. That's the Patriot Employer Tax Credit. I spoke to the President of the United States in a discussion with about 10 senators months and months ago in the cabinet room about these two ideas. The President said he liked the Patriot Employer Corporation, the Patriot Employer Tax Credit, giving tax benefits to those who do the right things. And apparently he seemed to like the corporate freeloader fee also, to punish those corporations that don't do the right thing and make them simply pay a fee to the government for that. But in the end, the President of the United States joined the majority leader and the Speaker of the House in writing a tax bill where 80% of the benefits 5 years from now, 80% of the benefits in that tax bill go to the richest 1% of the people in the country. Imagine instead if that tax bill had actually been written like this, in a way that would have seen wages go up and standards of living go up. But instead, the special interest went to work. Instead of tax reform that gives companies real incentives to invest in workers, we get a tax cut that leads to billions in stock buybacks that benefit corporate executives. Now, that meeting at the White House, the president also said, our tax bill is going to mean a $4,000 to $9,000 raise for the average American worker per year. Like, really? Nothing even close to that has happened. Instead, what companies have done is they've taken their largesse provided by middle class and working class taxpayers, taken that largesse that they got, the 1%, 80% of benefits going to the 1% wealthiest people in corporations. They've taken that money, they've done stock buybacks, they've increased their own executive compensation. Workers got almost nothing. Workers get squeezed on both ends. Paychecks don't grow fast enough. Corporations pay poverty-level wages. Housing gets more expensive. Think of this, Mr. President, a quarter of renters, a quarter of the people who rent in my state, not much different from anywhere else, pay half their income in housing. 400,000 renters in Ohio pay half their income or more in housing. You know what that means? It means if their car breaks down, it means if a kid gets sick, it means if you miss work for 2 weeks for some reason, you're probably going to get evicted. And it happens every day in every city, in every community, in every rural area of my state. We know we need to do more to preserve and grow our stock of affordable housing in this country. Instead, the administration's making it worse. They've hiked rents by 20% for almost all Ohio families that receive housing assistance. Back to Ms. Taylor in Columbus, Ohio. She's a home health aide. She still isn't paid enough. Average rents for Columbus families would go up 22%. You think her company's going to pay her 22% more, or even 10% or 5% more? But her housing costs are going up because of a decision by Dr. Carson, ratified by the White House, to cut that help, reduce that help. Housing, healthcare, education, gas, transportation, all get more expensive. Workers' wages aren't keeping up because corporations don't value workers. We know one solution to this problem: giving workers a voice in the workplace. Not a single worker can't take on a corporation, can't take on the CEO, can't take on the behemoth in the executive suite. That's why you need collective bargaining. Last September, 400 security officers in Columbus got a raise from as low as $9 an hour to a minimum of $12.45 an hour. They signed their first union contract with Service Employees International Union Local 1. That union card brought them a minimum $2.50 raise. That's still below what workers need, but it's progress because they've joined together. They've demanded a unified voice in the companies they help build. It's not just union. We need stronger workplace standards to make sure workers get the pay they earn. 2 years ago in Columbus, Ohio, the Vice President of the United States, I stood with the Vice President and the Secretary of Labor, and we announced an overtime rule where 130,000 Ohioans got a pay increase, or were working fewer hours for the same amount of money. Here's how it worked: if you're the supervisor on the night shift at a fast food restaurant, and you're making $35,000 a year, and your company decides, a fast food restaurant, big national company, decides to call you management, they can make you work 50 hours, 60 hours, 70 hours a week and pay you not a cent of overtime. So this updating of the federal overtime rule that we did, that the Secretary of Labor did with Vice President Biden and President Obama 3 years or so ago, this updating the overtime rule meant 130,000 Ohioans will get paid for that 45th or 50th or 55th hour. They'll get paid time and a half instead of going straight salary just because the company classified the overtime. Unfortunately, the folks in the White House, the folks that promised to drain the swamp, have sided with the fast food restaurants and with the big employers and are trying to strip away that overtime rule so those workers continue to have to work 50 or 60 hours and don't get a dime for it. Less time with their children, less time with their family, less leisure time, less pay, all that happens with that. So whose side are these people on? Fundamentally, whose side are they on? They're always on the side of the wealthy. They're always on the side of the richest corporations. They're always on the side of privilege. They're never on the side of people that fight and work and struggle just to stay above water. At the same time, we need to go after corporations that misclassify their workers. They pretend they're independent contractors so they can avoid paying into Medicare or Social Security, paying their share of taxes and wages. From housing to wages to workers' rights, we need to change how we think about these issues. It's not multinational corporations that drive the economy, it's workers. You know what, Mr. President, since 2010, since the auto rescue, every single month from 2010 until this month, at least, June 2018, every month we've had an increase in the number of net jobs created in this country. Every month since 2010. Granted, the growth, the president's comments notwithstanding, the growth in jobs in 2017 was less than the 5 years before, but we've had this slowly increasing economy where job growth isn't as big as we want, and wage growth certainly isn't as big as we want, but we've seen it. We've seen it because in 2010 and 11 and 12 and 13, the government understood that you grow an economy from the middle out. You don't give tax cuts to the richest people saying it's going to trickle down. You give tax breaks and you focus on growth in the economy in the middle out. So workers making minimum wage get raises. Workers But it's as I said, it's not multinational corporations that drive the economy. It's workers making minimum wage. It's workers paid in tips. It's workers on factory floors. It's workers behind desks. It's workers in hospital wards, in restaurant kitchens, in classrooms. Workers on salary, workers punching the clock. Fighting for the little guy, whether she punches a clock, whether he works in an office. Fighting for the little guy, whether she works construction or whether he works manufacturing. Fighting for the little guy, whether he sits behind a computer terminal or whether she's mid-level management in a fast food restaurant. You grow the economy from the middle class out. If work but if you don't value work, Americans can't earn their way to a better life for their family, no matter how hard they work. That's what people around here don't understand. I sat at this desk watching a very close vote last year where 49 of my colleagues, 49 out of 100 colleagues, all of whom have government-paid health insurance, stood on this floor and voted yes to taking away insurance in my state of 900,000 people, Wisconsin, 400,000 or 500,000 people who have government insurance paid for by taxpayers, that are U.S. senators, that have these jobs, that have these titles, that have this income, that have these benefits, were willing to take insurance away from millions of Americans, hundreds of thousands in my state alone. Again, if work isn't valued, if my colleagues in this body don't understand the value of work, and they don't seem to, frankly, with the way so many of my colleagues vote, Americans can't earn their way to a better life for their families, again, no matter how hard they work. That's what we have to change. Until Wall Street, until corporate boardrooms, until members of the United States Senate respect a hard day's work, we'll continue to see the consequences. The gap between Wall Street and Main Street will keep growing. It will be harder and harder for workers to afford housing and other expenses. Our middle class will continue to shrink, as it has, and our economy and our economic growth will continue to lag behind. We can work together to fix that. I note the absence of a quorum, Mr. President.
Clerk will call the roll.